Hello, everybody. We are about to get started again. And yes, we have in fact saved some of the best for last. This is our last session. Please grab your seats. Once again, we have a situation of needs no introduction. But John Kirton, my former prof, is going to be doing a fireside chat with, of course, the Right Honourable Joe Clark. Thank you both for being here. I will have an opportunity to come up when you're done for a thank you, but I'll thank you in advance. Then I can do a thank you after the fact. But it's going to be interesting.
Bienvenue encore une fois. Our closing keynote speaker, the Right Honourable Joe Clark, does of course need no introduction, certainly for Canadians of my age, but for those who are somewhat younger, it's worthwhile to reflect on and cherish all that he has done. The Right Honourable Joe Clark was elected 8 times to the House of Commons, always from Alberta, and twice from the Rocky Mountain riding in which Kananaskis resides today. He served as Canada's youngest Prime Minister and one of the most distinguished foreign ministers in Canadian history, another first. He was Prime Minister of Canada from June 4th, 1979 to March 3rd, 1980, and Secretary of State for External Affairs, that's what we called our foreign minister back then, from 1984 to 1991, then becoming Minister of Constitutional Affairs. Joe Clark played a key role in some of the defining accomplishments of recent Canadian and global history. The Commonwealth campaign against apartheid, which led inter alia to Nelson Mandela becoming a Canadian citizen. The free trade agreement between Canada and the United States, the grandparent of CUSMA, which we have today. The Ottawa Conference, which agreed on the 2+2 formula to unite Germany at the end of the Cold War, something few, as I was growing up, thought would ever would happen, and certainly not as peacefully as it did. And then closer to home, the negotiation of the Charlottetown Accord in Canada, a complex Canadian constitutional accord among the federal government, the provinces and territories, and, importantly, ahead of his time, the Indigenous peoples of Canada, too. Joe Clark has been Vice Chair of the Global Leadership Foundation, is now Chairman of the Supervisory Board of Meridian Infrastructure Africa, serves on the board of the Canadian company GlobeScan, and on a number of advisory boards, including that of the Institute for the Study of International Development at McGill University. He is also the chair of the Advisory Council of the Canadian International Council. So, Joe, without further ado, we welcome you to the podium.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be back. I am also very pleased I regret I wasn't here for the first session. I turned 86 the other day, and I find that my health is not quite as durable as I thought it would be. And in the middle of the night in a downtown hotel room, I suddenly woke up with shots of pain running through my feet. That has never happened to me before. If it's ever happened to any of you, I'd be happy to consult with you afterwards as to what I do the next time it occurs. But it cut into my sleep, and I realized that if I arrived drowsy to this podium, I'd put you all to sleep. So I decided to sleep in a little bit and arrive later. I am the Prime Minister who actually was born in Alberta. And I was pleased earlier this week, to be back in High River and to be welcomed by the new owners of the sturdy house my grandfather built more than a century ago. For reasons beyond my recollection and beyond the Clark family control, there was a decade or so when the house was unfortunately by and large uninhabited. But two things struck me. One was, here were these strangers from faraway Saskatchewan and Calgary who had come to High River, had liked the house, had a sense both of its perspective towards the Rocky Mountains and also, I guess, of its history, and bought it and are refurbishing it and are doing a quite wonderful job. I was really moved to be in a house that I had felt regretful that the family, through circumstances, had not quite abandoned, but not taken the care of that we should. And they have made it look very attractive, almost familiar. The rooms, I have to say, look smaller than they did when I was growing up. The view, however, is great. My grandfather built it when he'd been there for a decade as editor of the High River Times, founder and editor. And he had a westward-looking view. And even though there are now a couple of suburbs to the west of us, our house is high enough on the ground that you can look out and still see those spectacular Rocky Mountains. Those mountains caused my parents from time to time a little trouble because Dad was a member of the Canadian Weekly Newspapers Association, and there were national conventions, and often when people came to a national convention in Western Canada, they seemed to stop in at our house on the way to or from, which was fine, except that the Rocky Mountains look closer out of our then windows than they are to walk. And there was a farmer a mile and a half west of us named Mr. Soderberg. On 2 or 3 occasions, when I was allowed to answer the phone, he said, "Is your father there? Tell Charlie there are a couple of more of them out here who walked out to see the Rocky Mountains and can't get home. Could he drive the truck out and get them?" Anyway, those Rocky Mountains were in plain view yesterday, and I'm proud to be of them. When we look at the historic influence of Western Canada in the whole of Canada, I am the only Prime Minister who was born in any of the 3 prairie provinces. That virtual shutout contrasts with 7 born in Ontario, 6 in Quebec, 3 in Nova Scotia, 2 in England, 2 in Scotland, and at last, 1 in the Northwest Territories. Birthplace isn't destiny, but it is an indication of where influence has been and where a sense of alienation can bubble up, and reminds us why hosting an international conference at Kananaskis is significant more for the beauty and the security of the location. It's an indication that in this age, the country is sees itself more whole and is more whole than it had been. Like Mark Carney, I was a rookie prime minister, but my experience then had been almost entirely domestic, while he brings quite extraordinary international and economic credentials, and brings respect, including in the management of difficult individuals, circumstances, and challenges. And at the time when the respect and the authority of international institutions is under unusual pressure, that is a real asset to Canada. I haven't always regretted missing a remark by Jean Chrétien. In fact, there were some times when we sat across the floor from one another in the House of Commons when I'd heard too much from him. But I regret missing him today. We had a conversation yesterday. Had my health been a little bit better, I would have been in his audience with you. Mr. Chrétien and a few esteemed officials apart from them, I may have had more G7 and international conference immersion than anyone else in this room, including as foreign minister through dynamic summits, not just of G7 leaders, but of the Commonwealth and the Francophonie, and other conferences of the 1980s and 90s, many of which had durable and transforming impacts. They were about action, not just about talk, and almost always action that was effective because it was combined among nations, and on some issues because it generated carry-on action by citizens at home. Let me cite one proud Canadian example, not simply because of what the leaders did, but what citizens did, what Canadian citizens did afterwards. On June 28th, 1979, my first G7 summit, and the only one at which I led the delegation, the Tokyo G7 summit issued a statement addressing, quotes, "The plight of refugees from Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia poses a humanitarian problem of historic proportions." 4 weeks later, my government created the private sponsorship of refugees programs, which was embraced by an extraordinary grassroots private citizen response in Canada, sponsoring 60,000 Indo-Chinese refugees. Was that an exceptional response? Perhaps in numbers and drama, but it powerfully underlines that on many issues of courage and crisis and necessity, citizens want their countries to respond. Public engagement matters in a functioning democracy. And it matters particularly when it does, as this conference is doing, as its predecessors have done, brings together a diversity of participants and looks at issues that might not otherwise be high on the screen of the people who need to know more about it. In countries who claim to be democratic and free, there's often a latent instinct to engage, to identify potential progress and change, and to lift each other up. That instinct probably won't be the news out of Kananaskis next week, but it is a clear consequence of actions by nations and citizens. I was trying to think back on some of the things that happened in those periods, and it occurred to me that I should retitle this remarks, "When I Was Young," because they all occurred a long time ago. I remember my first preparation for a G7 conference. I wasn't supposed to go, but the electorate of Canada intervened, and I was elected. And whatever challenges that brought to other Canadians, challenges or opportunities, it brought acute challenges to the representatives of the Department of External Affairs, as it then was, who had to coach not only one brief new minister, but a woman and a noof who were going to go to Tokyo to represent Canada in the upcoming country. And I, of course, looked, even to them, like a teenager, not a G7 prime minister. That Tokyo summit in 1979 embraced climate change. And what's important about the embracing here is that very often important issues can arise that come to the attention of a particular nation or a particular leader. But the real challenge is to take that priority beyond those particularly interested people and expand it into some kind of transforming public consensus. That is one of the durable contributions of the G7 meetings, sometimes more successfully than in others, but always finding people who have a lot to disagree about, coming together in a context where their purpose is to agree and to try to generate change that goes well beyond their current ranks. That climate change decision by the G7, in effect, invented global governance of climate change. To the degree it had been on any government's agenda nationally, it had been almost incidental or direct. But suddenly it became a major international initiative, driven in that case by Helmut Schmidt of Germany. But I'm proud to say that the Canadian delegation was able to play a constructive role in that time. A later G7 meeting, in effect, ended the oil crisis flowing from the Iranian Revolution and set quantitative targets and timetables to reduce oil imports, and, as I have reason to believe, led governments to raise taxes on gas. I remember that with acute memory. John Manley, who's in the crowd, thought it was a quite wonderful thing to have happened in the country. And again, it was a G7 summit which put immigration on a broad public agenda by widening the doors of welcome of G7 countries to refugees who in Canada became welcome boat people. I want to just pause for a moment on the boat people, because whatever my government did, Canadian citizens pushed us further in that intake of 60,000 refugees, many of whom have grown up to be stalwart citizens and advocates of this country. There are eras when cooperation is in the air in international affairs. There are other eras when it is not. There are eras where there is a disposition on the part of many governments to pull together and move forward. And there are eras when one or two strong governments, or weak, are determined to stand back. We have to remember in these circumstances, when we look at the lens of the G7 through contemporary eyes, we have to remember what is possible in an organization of this kind. And not possible, but also effective. It's one thing for a national government to have a particular change in mind and to advocate it assiduously in capitals around the world. It is there is quite a different weight to an argument, to a proposition that comes out of a conference like a G7 conference. From time to time, the behavior of one or several of the G7 countries will cause people to wonder, is this worth the risk? Is it worth the energy? When that thought might cross our mind, we should bear in mind how much had been accomplished by these governments being willing to act together. And not, of course, only in the G7 context. That also is what I saw in some of the other international conferences of which I was part. It is not entirely natural for different countries with different perspectives to come together on important common causes, some of which might not be to their immediate advantage. But it is an essential aspect of our process, and one well worth respecting, particularly in hard times when we think that we have unusual difficulties to make the most of it. Not trivially, in a huge and diverse country like ours, such G7-inspired responses to latent turmoil and threat have had deep echoes across our complicated diversity. Canadians sometimes seem to treat division and diversity as a comfort, sometimes even as a cause. Despite that combative instinct, when threats arise, we remember our Canadian capacity to come together. One of the current Canadian dynamics, which I find fascinating, is the widespread instinct to cooperate among our provinces and heads of government. In part, that is threat-driven. Unfortunately, careless threats may last, but that cooperation is an instinct we should encourage. John Kirton has reminded me of some words I wrote in a book that he published in long ago, 1988, in which I said, there is simply no other country in the world that belongs to the particular combination of the Western Summit, the Organization of Cooperation and Development, the Group of Seven, the Quadrilateral, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the Commonwealth, and La Francophonie. No other major power has Canada's institutional reach. It is hard sometimes to keep that reach near the top of a national agenda. John knows that, I know that, anyone who has served in a national government does. But there is the momentum of this being a Canadian practice that is not only respected, but is regenerated in conferences like this. I was sitting at that table during the last session. I was hearing talk about issues that I knew. I sometimes knew the words. I no longer had the meaning. I did not understand the meaning. But I did understand this meaning. Here is a serious conference with a serious group of informed people who are talking about an issue that is the next climate change, that is the next major opportunity for nations who might have a variety of different interests to come together in the common good. And not only are not only are individuals and groups looking at these things, but there is here an auspices in which they can look at them together, both in this conference, which was a pre-G7 conference, but also in the G7 itself, which by definition is designed to bring leaders together, not simply to talk, but to identify actions where movement forward can be made. That is an invaluable Canadian consequence. I can't think of a comparison, for example, in the powerful United States, where there is that collegiality among our national and local governments to accomplish these great changes. I don't want to be accused of partisanship here, but I do want to make the point that one of Prime Minister Carney's most foresighted initiatives so far has been to make his first official international trip not next door, but instead to France and to the United Kingdom, the two original source countries of our nation, and by extension to Europe. That clearly is strategy, not nostalgia. That indicates a breadth of vision that takes account of our long-standing and up and down relation with the United States, but recognizes also the unique asset we have had, a product of our history, in connections with other countries in the world. Those estimable countries are older powers, some of them, not rising ones. And to take Africa as just one example, some of those powers thrived most in a colonial era, which is now both past and resented. If there is a disadvantage now to being a colonial power in the past or in reputation, are we making the most of our advantages as a fellow former colony? Although the real criterion should be future, not past. We need to build as deliberately on our significant ties to a broader array of allies whose links to both us and to the future have unusual potential. I am, in that context, unusually pleased that one of the presidents who will be at Kananaskis is Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, who has experienced Canada's capacity as both a critical partner and an ally of Africa. I should say that I last met President Ramaphosa 2 years ago when I was briefly recruited to help seek support for Canada's candidacy for the Security Council. He and an impressive array of his senior ministers met me in a frank, very friendly, and only occasionally nostalgic conversation. He knew why I was there, and I am practiced enough to raise the key questions, but sometimes to read the room rather than ask for a direct response. I doubt we won the vote of South Africa, which raises a critical question about which of our once close friends may need to be won again, not by times past and nostalgia, but by opportunities now or looming, and both within and beyond the Commonwealth and Francophone connections, which countries are rising in their capacity and influence and might, among other factors, find us a valuable partner or hedge in a changing world. That's what I had to say from the podium, which I have been granted. If there are questions later on, I look forward to them, and I will do my best to try to answer, to provide some coherent answers. I'm very pleased to be, not only pleased, I'm proud of my province and of a city which I once had the privilege to represent in the House of Commons, in taking this very vigorous and consistent, foresighted role, not simply in pursuit of its own immediate interests, but in active pursuit and recognition of the larger interests, where Canada, and let me say so emphatically, the West, can have a defining influence. I've admired this group since I first heard of it. I can't recall sitting in one of your sessions before when I knew so little about some of the current topics that were being addressed. That's not simply my deficiency. That is a recognition that there is a new sense of urgency to a new range of topics that are going to engage public opinion and that are going to require consensus of the kind that the G7 uniquely has been able to provide. Need the kind of consensus that we're going to need to look forward. And there can only be that consensus on the level of people in high office if they know there is consensus and interest among their citizens at home. And that is one of the major reasons why why the high standard that has been set and established and followed by this organization, this conference, is so valuable. I think we might have some Q&As later on. Thank you very much for your attention and for nobody throwing anything.
Thank you so much, Joe. As the questions begin to come in, let me exercise the chair's prerogative to ask the first. Looking forward a few days to the second Kananaskis Summit in the Rocky Mountain riding. What do you most hope and expect these G7 leaders will do there?
I think what is most critical is not a particular stance, but it is an understanding and assertion of the strength, of the greater strength our countries have when they are together. There have been discussions on aspects of that issue here today. There's been prudent advice that sometimes the most progress will be made in a quiet setting rather than in a public setting. The dynamics of the United States at the moment mean private settings are harder to find, and public settings are more difficult to navigate, but they nonetheless exist. And governments are led not only by their leaders, but also by others in their ranks, and are sensitive to public opinion. We have to be sure that the gains of both coherence but also working together that have been a hallmark of the G7 in the past remain a hallmark in the future. There have been temptations before. There are temptations now. The tradition has been to face those traditions, those more troublesome traditions down, and to find more agreement. I think that will happen because I think there is a very wide agreement within the G7 that it should happen. If I might make an ancillary point, Canada prizes our relation in the G7, obviously, and not least because it sits us down as an equal with other countries that are powers. But our role in the past has also been highly influential in gatherings of countries that were not all powerful, but who had some links, even if in many cases, only links of aspiration. We are, for all of our apparent and occasional internal differences, we are an international country, and we are becoming more and more international in both our populations and naturally, because of those populations, in our perspective. We are also a country that treats the reputation as mediator as being a compliment, not an asset, not a criticism. That capacity to mediate, to build upon the reputation that we have gathered is important to maintain. It is the case in the G7, where it is probably easier, but it is also the case more broadly. The G7's success is important, I think, to the whole architecture of countries collaborating. If there were something untoward or difficult to occur in the G7, that could spread to other arrangements. And yet we are one of 7, not one of several in the G7. We have an unusual influence. We are in the chair in this case. We sometimes take these organizations for granted or underestimate the impact they can have in the practical decisions that are made by individuals and governments and corporations across the globe. They're very important, and we have to do, and Canada has an unusual capacity, duty, I would say, to maintain respect for the strength of those organizations of cooperation.
Thank you. The next question. My preface is, I remember the Toronto Summit of 1988, not surprisingly, when you and your Prime Minister got all of the leaders to strongly welcome the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement brought to you by us, by Ronald Reagan. So you've had great success in dealing with Republican presidents of the United States. Not all of Canadians, of course, admired them when they first came to power. So in that context, the question is, what should Prime Minister Carney's strategy be to prevent potential derailment of summit discussions and success by Donald Trump?
I suspect that the best approach for Canada and some other countries, certainly Canada, to make to the president is a more private rather than a more public approach. I think that I watched the dynamics, I'm sure all of us did in the conversation. The president has a way of demonstrating it when he demeans or disrespects his interlocutors. That was certainly not the case in the conversation with Prime Minister Carney. Carney brings a pre-election reputation that the president first does not have, and secondly, that the president's advisors and admirers would probably respect. We have some substantial assets in private for more private discussions. More public ones will be troublesome so long as the president is the performer that he is. And I don't think there's any point our throwing up our hands or criticizing him or doing this sort of thing. I think we simply have to find and augment our quite significant capacity to deal with officials in the United States to not necessarily serve our interests or advance our interests, but to behave in a constructive way. So I think it would be wise to have more private dealings and fewer public dealings until the proclivities of the U.S. president change.
The next question inspires another recollection. The G7 Toronto Summit in 1988 was but the culmination, you'll remember, of you and your prime minister's a great summit hat trick. Within the space of a year, you hosted a very successful Francophone summit in Quebec City, as I recall, a Commonwealth one in Vancouver, and then in Toronto. So the question is, what is Canada's path forward in a more multilateral world and a weakening United States? What is our place in the world today?
I don't think we should assume it's a weakening United States. I think we have to deal with it as a power that, rather than becoming weaker, is perhaps becoming more difficult to manage. And I tried to address some of the approaches I think we have to take to that. The larger question interests me, and I'm very, at my age, I'm careful of nostalgia, and I am subject to nostalgia. But my recollection of the interrelationships I had as foreign minister was that there was a fairly wide range of countries with whom we had and had developed quite strong relations. A number of them were in the developing world. Some of them were relationships we had inherited, as we inherited some of the relationships in the Commonwealth and La Francophonie. And we came into them, as they did, as colonies of a greater power, Paris, the UK in those cases. But our conduct, the conduct, I think, of governments of all parties in Canada in those meetings, broadened Canada's influence and capacity to have influence upon the leaders, and consequently, that helped us have influence upon the policies and the populations of a wide range of countries. I'm afraid our range is weaker now. It is not as strong as it should be. I mentioned deliberately the response in South Africa. I don't take that personally, and I could be wrong. I didn't ask them how I voted, but I have a clear sense as to how they voted. Why would South Africa vote against Canada in a Security Council matter? Partly it was that we came in late, but part of it, I think, was that there had been some kind of unconscious decline in the relation that we had maintained with that country. And if it happened with South Africa, it has probably happened more to the point with others. You know, it has occurred, I'm very much aware that much of Canada's early international strength had to do with the fact that we were a child of a colonial power. And to some degree, bridges that had been built or opened by the British or by the French were easier for us to traverse. I don't know that we were ever dependent upon those bridges. And in fact, we built bridges of our own to many of those countries. What has happened is that the then superpowers, France and the U.S., France and the U.K., are less powerful now. And that, in a sense, creates an opportunity for us to play a role of partnership with nations we had first met in those circumstances that are Canada to them relationships. I'm not sure we are doing that enough. And I think it is I think if we were to reassess the focus of our international policy and our capacity to build quiet alliances, quiet, valuable alliances with a wide range of countries could be improved.
Back to Tokyo, 1979. You were not the only rookie leader at that G7 summit. The British and the Japanese leaders were also there at their first summit. Margaret Thatcher, you were not always natural soulmates on some of the defining issues at the time. But how did that dynamic of three rookies affect, well, your relationship with them and then the summit dynamic as a whole?
Well, I think there was a natural bonding among some of the other newer faces at the table. We also, the role of President Carter, in our case, was certainly very helpful at that time. A new leader is always greeted, not always formally, but not in an insulting way by leaders who've been there before. Consistently, I was greeted warmly. I didn't believe it all at the time. And I think that what that demonstrates is that we're now in an age where we have to make more of our own arrangements and alliances ourselves.
The next question, and here I'm sure the questioner and all of us wish to have you drawn your experience as Minister of Constitutional Affairs. I did reference the Charlottetown Accord. The question is much closer to home. What do you think can be done to address the threat of Alberta separatism?
I think there is an instinct in Alberta that is stronger than it might be to continue to think it would be better off in some other capacity. I don't want to exaggerate that. I know that there are some media caricatures of the Premier in that context. I don't know her very well, but what I do know of her, and I've made a point to talk to people who know her better, we have both High River connections, that she is in fact a much more moderate force than some people would suggest that she is. The risk, however, is that people who, for reasons other than, the risk is that there will be some gnawing away at that issue. There has been for some time. There has been an indication, you couldn't call it separatism, but an inclination of built-in discomfort with the national arrangement for a long time in the country. And so I think the country has to act quite deliberately to try to go out of its way to earn the confidence of this province. Let me make a comparison that may seem strange or unwelcome at the moment. And I'm not comparing the independentist instincts in Quebec with whatever separatist instincts there might be in Alberta, except that there was an appearance of that kind of movement in both places. And some of the response initially by national governments was simply to condemn this. But rather quickly, not only national governments, but leaders of national parties very directly engaged in trying to find common ground with Quebecers, not necessarily with the government of René Lévesque or others, although he was an estimable premier and leader, but more generally. And the national debate came to realize that we were not dealing in the question of Quebec independence with some one province eccentricity. This had some roots in history and had to be dealt with. And so I think the country as a whole, our country as a whole, began to look for ways in which it could be more understanding of Quebec. I've always been struck that the Johnson name, Premier Johnson, and his son, Premier Johnson, I didn't know them well, but what I did know about them was that every year they got on the train and they came out to Banff. It was their favorite place in the country to go. We assumed that Quebecers would have no interest in coming to even less spectacular parts of Alberta than Banff. But in fact, there have been a range of connections. And the point I want to make is that over time, there was a deliberate strategy followed not only by the national government, but I can say this with some authority, by the leadership of national parties to make sure that we built down the suspicions that had grown among, call them the soft independentists in Quebec. I think that there needs to be much more deliberate priority given by the national government to the distinctive aspirations of Alberta. By distinctive, I don't mean separatist or independentist. I simply mean taking account of Quebec realities. There is no reality in Alberta, I risk saying, that is as deep as the linguistic reality, linguistic cultural reality in Quebec. But I don't need to tell you that there are fairly substantial differences in Alberta's definition of our nature and our role in the country. Those need to be attended to very carefully, and not wishing to cast aspersions on people no longer in office. That has not always been the case. I think that Prime Minister Carney has an unusual opportunity, even though he wasn't born here, to take advantage of that. He's seen as a serious, thoughtful, pan-Canadian leader, and I think that will that means there is a greater chance of attention being paid, and a greater reason for Albertans to seek ways in which commonalities can be found and built. Look, we became a confederation out of choice. It took us a while in adding various countries, various entities to the whole, but one can understand, it's in the fact the very nature of Canada, that there are going to be significant differences in attitude and aspiration among the citizens of different origins in a country as huge and diverse as ours. Part of the success of Canadian federalism, say I as a former constitutional affairs minister, is in fact to find those agreements. I want to just smuggle something in here. I lost a referendum on the Constitutional Accord. I fully understand that. I lost it here in Calgary too. Everywhere I lost it. But what's interesting is that I achieved it. And I shouldn't say I achieved it. What's interesting is that we achieved it. We achieved unanimous agreement. And you know who made the single most critical, because of its timing, intervention? Was the late Premier of Alberta, Don Getty, who, and his constitutional skill might surprise some of you. And it really wasn't constitutional. He was a quarterback. He understood what drove other people. And at one unusually tense moment in the discussions, he came up to me and he said, would you adjourn for half an hour so I might speak to Clyde? Clyde being Clyde Wells, the Premier of Newfoundland. I certainly did. Getty went down, talked to Clyde. Getty came back and said, I think if you reconvened and we suggested this, we would have unanimity. We reconvened, I suggested that, we had unanimity. Could anyone else, could a federal official have done that? I couldn't, I don't think. But Don Getty to Clyde Wells, Premier to Premier, was able to make a critical case that gave us unanimity. Now, it didn't serve us very well in the subsequent election campaign, but you have to ask John Manley why that happened rather than ask me.
Joe, the next question is thinly disguised as a compliment and one which touches my heart and life. It is, one of my closest friends and her family came to Canada because of your decision in Japan, the boat people. Thank you. It is the opportunity, a lasting legacy that leaders hopefully at the upcoming G7 summit will be mindful of, be inspired by as they deal with the issue of immigration in a complex world today?
Well, but it was, sorry, I had an answer to that which slipped out of my mind. It happens from time to time. I
It
never
will come
respond to
back.
that.
You can reflect on the compliment while you recall it.
My problem is I get so few compliments, I'm overwhelmed by them when they come. I'm literally struck dumb.
Okay. Another one close to my heart. Can you envisage a future where Canada is no longer a junior partner on the international stage, given our rising population, largely from immigration, of course, and our abundance of natural resources, and of course, many other things?
Yes, I certainly can. We are an attractive country to most other countries. Not everyone is. The question is, and in fact, we have had a series of relationships. We were colonies together with a number of countries. In some cases, that is quite an asset. I don't want to exaggerate that. In some cases, that is an asset. So I think our range for building relations with other countries is much stronger than it has been. That's part of the reasons. I have an abundance of reasons to focus on South Africa, obviously. I was very much involved in issues relating to that country. But it seems to me that in the early times after the election of Mandela, there was an unusually and real and deep bond between Canada and South Africa. And it was, and South Africa is a country of great resources and accomplishment and potential influence. That, I don't think anyone's lost that, but I think it has withered. And I have the impression that there may have been a withering of our relation with other countries that could and would want to be allies with Canada. You know, every country needs allies. We're a pretty good ally. We're a long way from other places in several particulars. But I should pursue this more with people who study foreign policy without the eyes of nostalgia. But I think that there is a strategy we should be looking at here in terms of countries in the wider world with whom Canada could establish excellent relations. Some of them, of course, would be economic. Some of them would not be. And what has happened, my impression, and I stand to be corrected, my impression is that our presence in the continent of Africa has declined over the last decades. I don't think that was deliberate, but I think it was unfortunate because there are potential alliances in countries that have some of the inherent economic and other strengths that Africa holds. And obviously, we work very hard at our relations with some countries, particularly in Asia, that are hard to deal with. Well, in the legendary Canadian diplomatic era, the era of Lester Pearson, we didn't necessarily go out and seek alliances with other countries. Our good works on common causes caused other countries to respect us. And consequently, when there was a Canadian knock on the door, the knuckles were they weren't seen as knuckles. They were seen as the hands of a friend. And I think that opened a range of possibilities. Canada at that time was not overtly interested in developing all of those, but we rather prized them. They're still strong. They're more relevant to us now, particularly as our own population is, as you mentioned, much more multicultural. We're not a country anyone has reason to be afraid of. In fact, we're a country that many other countries have good reasons to work with. That requires us being interested in that And it may be that a new government, recognizing the challenges we face, will also be driven by the extent of those challenges to take a look at areas where our opportunities are greater. And I think if we do that as a country, it will. Let me make a confession as a former minister. I had no particular connections with some of the smaller states of Asia. My departmental officials, whom I deeply admired, came to me and suggested that in my travels I should make sure that I am more there than not there, which I was. And there weren't any transformative changes, but there was a strengthening of relations then that was important to Canada as we moved forward. I think there was a similar, going back to Africa, and I don't want to appear to be preoccupied with it, but our position on apartheid won us friends in the whole of Africa. I'll not forget, I became the chair of the Commonwealth Committee on Southern Africa, and the nominal chair of committees in the Commonwealth was the United Kingdom. My colleague as Prime Minister was Margaret Thatcher. Africa did not respond warmly to her chair. Africa and the members of that Commonwealth Committee were extremely helpful to me during the long campaign that we conducted. And I think there is a capacity there. And it's not that we don't pay attention to them. It is that we have so many places where we have to pay attention. If we were making a logical choice, A, B, C, that would be one thing. I'm not sure that we are focusing on the potential of allies to the degree we should.
Joe, your answers to that question have inspired 2 more compliments, but sadly we are out of time because I know you'd want to keep speaking and answering that question, so more would flow in. Before I hand it over to Martha to give the benediction and to release you to bilateral conversations, I shall simply end by reading the 2 at the risk of embarrassing you. Such an important comment that there are opportunities to build bridges again with other former colleagues. And the final one, thank you for your tremendous bravery and decency in the battle against apartheid in South Africa.
Thank you.
Well, what a inspirational way to end the day. Let's have a round of applause again for Dr. Kirton and Prime Minister Clark. Sure.
Sorry, if I can just add, because I did this morning and you were not here, sir. I'm a proud Albertan, but as a Canadian first and foremost, I want to ask everybody here to join me in thanking you for your service to our country.
So thanks again. One quick fact about Prime Minister Clark. When he left politics, my understanding is, and sorry, by way of introduction, my name is George Antonopoulos. I'm here representing Dentons, who's the presenting sponsor for today's conference. When Prime Minister Clark left politics, he actually joined a law firm which was a predecessor firm to Dentons in the 90s. And I'm on good authority that when you join the firm, new students are required to do a skit night, and where they're usually poking fun at some of the partners and other members of the firm. And my understanding is that at the time, Prime Minister Clark actually joined in on the skit night, and actually did a very good job. So unfortunately, we don't have video of that. that evening, but thanks again to Prime Minister Clark. So thank you all for being part of what has been an incredibly rich and forward-looking day. The dialogue we've had here reflects both the complexity and the urgency of today's geopolitical environment, not just in Canada, but across the G7 and beyond. Let's have a round of applause to the School of Public Policy, the University of Calgary, the G7 Research Group for putting together such a great agenda and a phenomenal group of panelists. Let's also give a round of applause and thanks to the U of C for hosting this event, and also to the staff members for putting on what was a seamless day. From my vantage point as a lawyer, deeply embedded in the energy sector, and as someone who works closely with clients across the traditional and emerging energy spectrum, today has reinforced a key theme, which is one of energy security. Decarbonization goals are essential, but they must be backed by pragmatic planning that recognizes the continued role of traditional energy in the global system. Traditional energy remains central to global energy reliability and affordability, especially as the world transitions. We've heard from multiple panels today discussing the pledges from governments here in Canada and other G7 nations on its renewed focus on energy investment as key to economic security. But it's not just about pledges, it's about structuring the legal, commercial, and financial frameworks that turn these pledges into action. Succeeding in energy security will be essential to achieving resiliency and productivity. These were two key terms that I heard in multiple panels today, including emphatically from Vice Admiral Norman. Achieving resiliency and productivity then gives nations flexibility to pursue military and economic security. As we look ahead to the 2025 G7 Summit in Kananaskis, I hope our global leaders continue to strike a thoughtful balance on the issues discussed in our panels today, pursuing bold, forward-looking ambition while staying grounded in the practical realities of the fragile geopolitical environment in which we currently exist. On behalf of Dentons, I want to say thank you again to the organizers, panelists, and all of you who are doing the difficult work of making energy policy actionable. I'd like to welcome Martha Hall Findlay to close out the day.
Just a huge thank you to Dentons. Thanks, George. Your support of this is also incredibly welcome, and we're very grateful. Thank you very much. I'm holding you all from a glass of wine. So I'm just going to say this was an incredible day. I do want to thank in particular also the team at the School of Public Policy, who have rallied a whole lot of volunteers and a whole lot of people to in addition to folks from here in the building at the UFC, who have worked behind the scenes and now on the scenes all day. So please, a round of applause for our team. And this actually, I mean, it's great. It's here at the university, and we are thrilled to be a part of it. But this would not have happened without the G7 Research Group. John Kirton, Madeline Cox, Sally Elliott, I think you're still here. These people do this every time there's a G7. It just so happened that they have been friends of mine for so many years, and Calgary was the host university. And so it wouldn't have happened without them. And every week in those meetings to work on pulling this together. So John, Madeline, Sally, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. And then finally, thank you to all of you. What a great crowd. This has been, you've been engaged, you've been listening, you've been putting in questions. You've been clearly enjoying it the way I've been enjoying it. I can't believe the conversations we've already had today. So thank you to the panelists, of course, but give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you all for being here with us. And reception out in the other room. Thank you very much.